Okay, hello and welcome everybody to my presentation called Modern Simple Java Microservices in the Cloud. This is basically a description and a story about how we do microservices, and this is obviously based on the experiences and conclusions that we have taken within the place where I work at. I know this is around lunch hour. In that case, if you're slightly sleepy, if you need to grab a coffee, the too long didn't read version of the next 20 minutes is here, and the next too long didn't read after the presentation is at the end of the presentation. By basically, uh, the unsurprising experience that we have had with microservices is that managing and working with a lot of services is hard enough. So we like to limit the number of moving things to simplify what we're dealing with so that we can move faster. And this so far has worked for us quite well. And if I compare it to some of the organizations I've seen before, exceptionally well. Now, my name is Andrzej Grzesik. I have a Twitter, and you can email me for the slides. And as you have seen in many places, I work at Revolut. I've been here for 2 years plus, so far having fun. So far, would recommend the place to work and to use because it's quite nice and it's really impressive at how quickly everything changes and moves forward here. Now, having said that, a couple of facts about me. I'm a Java champion, Java 1 rockstar. You might recall me from something called Geekon or Kraków Hadoop user group, or Software Craftsmanship Kraków or Polish Java user group. But those mostly are a few years old now because there haven't been a lot of conferences around in the past 2 years for obvious reasons. If you have any questions about the talk, drop them in the chat or grab me after. I'm happy to discuss. I have the chat open on one of the windows. I should be able to see it, so I might be able to take the questions as they materialize. If you don't, well, no problem. If you have any questions about Revolut, then this is something I will definitely be happy to talk about, but after the talk. I'm not going to interrupt. Obviously, Revolut is hiring, so if you want to work in a Java first fun microservices environment in which a lot of things is moving fast, I recommend the place. Come and join me, work with me. Obviously, also, I represent my own opinions, my own understanding of how Revolut, the organization, does things. So all the mistakes are my own, and it's not my intent to misguide you. But if I do, I'm so sorry up front. Now, I obviously like dry jokes. If that's not obvious, then now it is obvious because I've said it. So if there is a picture or something that resembles a dry joke, I will sometimes use it as a reminder for myself to drink, like this one. And let's start with a process that's quite common in biology that you might have had experience with, as in if you've ever found a rock with a bug or some sort of an very old being that's now part of a rock, then it is that because of something called calcification. And the formal definition of calcification is here. I've taken it from Wikipedia. Basically, what happens, as I understand it, because I am not a biologist, is that calcium accumulates in body tissue, which makes body tissue less and less flexible and makes movement less and less easy. And I found this process quite present in software. If you've worked with a system that at first was very easy to change and everybody was so excited and everybody was so eager to make changes, and pull requests or just changes took minutes or hours, and then over time as it became bigger and bigger and tests took longer and longer and there were more and more bugs and dependencies and everything took more and more and more and more time, then this is exactly what I see as calcification of software systems. This is a thing. Most of you in here probably have experience with that. And this process, this is something that is potentially quite deadly to microservices, but it's not only deadly to microservices, as in it makes developers and software engineers and everybody else working with software sad, but it can also kill a company. Imagine if any change that you want to introduce, imagine if it would take, for example, 2 weeks minimum because your environment was so dated that you can only run them. You can only run the tests using some old dated desktop somewhere, which sits in a vault because, well, you don't really have spares. It has happened historically in some of the companies out there. I will not give you any names, but if you Google well enough, you will find some places with that. This is why everybody goes microservices. This is why everybody is following cutting domains, cutting things into smaller pieces so that they become more manageable. But as we do that, we have to be aware that this process is there. And if we don't manage our services well, then they are prone to calcification. And with that, let's go for a short trip back in time. Picture, so I get to drink. Everybody recognizes the movie, but we'll go a bit further to year never, the Big Bang. Actually, there is nothing really related to software in the Big Bang, but I thought it would be a nice start. Some people say it never happened. Obviously, there is the Big Bang Theory show on the TV, so obviously it must have. The relevant part of history, as in from the point of view of this presentation, starts in 1997. Well, probably a bit earlier, but 1997 is when EJBs came around, or EJBs came into Java. How did they get into Java? Well, Sun got the idea from IBM and actually thought it's a good idea and implemented it. And what were EJBs for those of you who have never worked with them? That was an architectural pattern in which the architecture was divided into 3 tiers. There was the data tier, namely the database. There was the backend tier, and there was the frontend tier. And frontend would make calls to the backend over Corba, another legacy technology, and that would be something that EJBs made possible. It was, as you can imagine, old, clunky, and not the most convenient way to do. But that is how progress happens. Sometimes it takes time to iterate to a better implementation of an idea. What happened later? 1999, server specification entered the Java space. Web applications materialized in the Java platform. Servlets came to be, as in if you can imagine Java without servlets, well, it used to be the case. Now, servlets is what people probably don't use that much because, the API is old and clunky, but it ended. It materialized in the Java platform in 1999. So servlets, for those of you who have never had the pleasure, allow Java code to emit, to handle HTTP requests. So no longer a need for EJBs. Now, 2001, A Space Odyssey. Awesome movie, but I cannot play YouTube movies here, and this is not what we are here. But yeah, anyway. Also in 2001, what happened was EJBs 2.0. EJBs 2.0, apart from a lot of different changes, they decided to fix 2 things. First, not all of the calls have to be slow because somebody realized that sometimes front-end and back-end are going to be placed on the same machine. And that made EJBs 2 faster because you didn't have to go through RMI. And they were also quite terrible because you had to generate a lot of the things through something called xdoclet. If you have no idea what it is, you are in the happier part of the society. In a direct reaction to EJBs, there materialized something that a lot of you are very familiar with. Some of you even might love it, something called Spring. Spring 0.9 is not exactly the Spring that we have right now, but Spring 0.9 was kind of introduced and then materialized because EJBs were too complex. And so time moves on. In 2005, everybody was raging because Ajax, asynchronous JavaScript and REST or JSON. So X was there for XML, but people went for the simpler format. Then 2006, EJB 3.0, a massively overhauled, massively simplified specification, heavily inspired by Spring, heavily inspired by Hibernate. It is a reaction to previous iterations of EJB because they were too complex. And so 2014, we get Spring Boot 1.0. 2014 Spring Boot. Well, now everybody is using Spring Boot, or a lot of people are using Spring Boot, but definitely not everybody because we are not. But then it was a new thing. It was the exciting thing. It was the lean, lightweight Spring. So Spring Boot happened because the main Spring framework was started to be considered too complex. this is wow, because Spring Boot is a response to Spring, which was a response to EJB. So you can see progress in the direction of simplicity. And then just yesterday, I found this screenshot about a movie that you have a link down there to. Basically, what it says is Java EE had much better and much smaller and much well thought through APIs compared to 10 times bigger Spring. I am not going to say whether this is correct or this is incorrect, but there is a sentiment that Spring Framework, the big Spring Framework, especially around 2.530 version times, was quite a beast. And what happened later? Well, in 2016, we maybe not we, because I didn't use it. Microprofile came to be because Spring was too big and Java EE itself was too big. So you can see some of the specifications that you might be very familiar with right as of now. There is Open Tracing, there is Open API, there is REST Client, there is JAX-RS, JSON-B, JSON-P, and CDI, and so on and so on. The details don't matter. What matters is the overall trend across the years is to simplify. Why? Because when we have achieved a capability, so the ability to build something, we want to then simplify. It should not become the exciting thing because it is usually not the exciting thing. And so we will start our journey into simple cloud first microservices with the simplicity of Stack. How can you do a hello world in Java? I've picked 3 random examples or almost random examples. One is in Helidon, one is in Spark, one is in Javelin. Spark and Javelin are both frameworks that we actively use in Revolut. As you can see, they are rather simple. You don't need to have a lot of the things that you used to have before. It's basically a response to a request. And I will say that because I wrote the Helidon example without having too much experience with Helidon, it is probably possible to make it even simpler, even easier. What does it tell you? Or what can it spark in you? Well, it can spark a dream. And the dream that it should spark is the one in which my slides change. I'm terribly sorry, but this is not even my connection. My Mac completely froze. And this is an Intel-based one, so I can only dream of getting a newer one. And all I can say, apologies, because this is quite beyond my control. Now, we paused around this slide. I have no idea what you heard as the last thing, so I'll try to make up with the lost time and continue. What we were looking at, Java web frameworks. 3 examples: Spark, Javelin, and Helidon, all quite simple. You don't need a lot of load. Now, have you ever imagined writing software, what it would be like to write all of the software without the bloat, whatever bloat means in a specific context? I think many of you have had exactly this experience when you were working on something. How great it would be if it wasn't for this or that or that or that. It's normal. It happens. What I find really often that is helpful at first, but then gets in the way a lot, is frameworks. And I will not be the only one to say that I very frequently write applications that just start from public static void main and do not use a lot of frameworks. I think I made this realization that I might not be a huge fan of frameworks when I heard somebody, probably 12 years ago, maybe even more, when we had a new project in Java to develop. And they said, okay, we're going to use Spring and Hibernate. Hey, but you don't even know what the project is going to do. You probably have colleagues who have this kind of thinking. I'm not going to say this is wrong, but I'm going to say sometimes a framework or some frameworks do not fit the domain. And also with frameworks, there is one more thing to them. That's more code and more complexity and more things in the stack trace. And I like to say that there are 2 kinds of engineers. 2 kinds of engineers in how should I say it? I think the best way to say it this one. Imagine it's 2 in the morning. You've come back from a fun night out and fun is being had and everybody's happy. and now the support phone calls or something breaks on production. How easy or how convoluted is it to fix your software? Do you understand what's that? Can you understand the stack inside out? And can you fix it? Some of the frameworks might give you very gory experiences if you need to fix something. From my personal experience, if the bug that you're trying to solve is because another language on the same platform that you're running has broken the way Java does method resolution, it is not a fun problem to solve. I do not recommend the experience to anybody. In a similar fashion, I do not like, I hate annotation-driven problems. So problems in which the source code seems correct, but it happens because something went wrong with some of the annotation process, or there is an unexpected side effect that nobody bothered to document. So I like to see the code that I can run with. I like to see the code that is being run, to be able to try to go through it in the IDE, to get into it with the debugger, and to obviously for it to have tests. But if there is anything on the runtime, it should be accessible. You might have worked with a third-party library which just gives you a jar file and doesn't give you sources. Hopefully, and I really keep my fingers crossed for you, this is not the case, but that's a painful situation to debug. Similarly, frameworks which are big and just complex are sometimes very painful to debug. This is why we, in the context of Revolut, tend to avoid them. Not to avoid them completely, but we avoid the frameworks that promise to do magic, because magic is great at first, but then if you need to get into the details, it becomes a bit difficult. We're not radical like the Fantastic Beasts movement that I've taken a picture inspired from, but it's not only Revolut. It's many people out there, many people in the internet have explored and started using magic-free frameworks. Examples are what? Some examples are Drop Wizard, Finagle, Helidon, Spark Java. The list